Preston Dennett first began investigating UFOs in 1986 after learning that his family and friends and co-workers were having encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of people and investigated a wide variety of cases, but none of his previous books are more important to him than Symmetry, a true UFO adventure. And Preston's joining us now. Hi, Preston.
Hi, Dean. How are you doing?
I'm well. This is a fascinating story, Dolly Safran, that you've produced in book form now. As I mentioned, Symmetry, a true UFO adventure. What attracted you to Dolly's story?
It was so extensive. I think really the main difference is that many people have these encounters, but sort of perceive them through the lens of fear. There's a lot of fear surrounding the subject. That's just not the case with Dolly. For whatever reason, she overcame her fear of these experiences. And another really major difference is she is what I would call a fully conscious contactee. A lot of people have missing time, amnesia, memory problems surrounding their encounters. And that's also not true with Dolly. For whatever reason, she was able to overcome that as well. And she actually sought me out. Turns out she decided to go public. And she started asking her ET contacts about this, and they encouraged her and told her that she would find a good researcher if she searched. And she had a little bit of trouble. She was looking for someone who could represent her experiences objectively, honestly, completely. And she couldn't find a person she felt was a good fit. And the ETs, she said, actually said my name. Said, we want you to look up Preston Dennett.
Wow.
So that was thrilling and humbling and a little weird, to say the least. So that's how she reached out to me. And I was, thrilled, because I can tell you I've never heard a case quite like this. It's easily, I'd say, the most extensive case I've ever researched.
Yeah. Did you have any doubts that she was telling the truth?
Well, initially, I wouldn't say doubts, but I like to determine, and vet each witness as best as I can. And I will do repeated interviews, get references, look up their jobs, see if they have any other witnesses to support their story. And she started ticking all the boxes very quickly. She was quite emotional about her story, like many witnesses, very reluctant to say everything all at once. And did eventually really prove it to me. I mean, she has some excellent photographic evidence with daylight films, numerous photographs, nighttime films. And I met her in person, and UFOs showed up over our heads. So
wow.
This was the kind of case like I'd always dreamed of getting. So I wouldn't say I initially had doubt, but I approach each case with, a sort of objective skepticism, and just wait to see how it rolls out. And she absolutely proved her case to me.
Yeah, because you're including photos in the book. Will the photos include some of this evidence?
Yes. It doesn't really compare, because when you see the film itself, I asked Dolly to put up a YouTube so people could view some of these films, which she did. And absolutely, the films are far more persuasive than the still photographs, because photographs don't hold as much weight perhaps today as they used to. There's so much out there. A lot of it's CGI. And I honestly don't even take photos that seriously unless the person is willing to stand behind their photos, provide an interview, and so forth. Because there's so much anonymous stuff out there, it's not super helpful.
Yeah. Did you realize what a big responsibility that you had in helping Dolly tell her story?
Not initially. I have to tell you, she was very reluctant and very guarded at first, and I did not quite perceive how extensive her story was for some time. And as I was interviewing her, she had a tendency to sort of gloss over details. And I'm like, you just described being taken to another planet in 3 sentences. I could write a book about that. Can you provide more detail? She apologized and says, I'm sorry. I've spent my whole life keeping this secret. I've trained myself not to talk about it. It's very difficult because she did experience some ridicule and disbelief as a young child within her own family. Like many contactees, they keep it secret from everybody. So initially, yeah, I had no idea that how extensive her experience was. And in fact, I included her story in a chapter of a previous book, Onboard UFO Encounters. And she freely admitted that there was a lot she hadn't told me. I did not realize how much.
Yeah.
But after she saw the chapter and how I, represented her story, that's when she really started to open up.
Yeah. Is this a book that you've always wanted to write, focusing on an individual rather than a collection of stories?
100%. Yeah. I love doing the collections. I love finding patterns in UFO research and doing, studying this phenomenon in all of its myriad facets. But I knew there was a person out there with a big story because I'd run into them. And, I always encourage people to write their own books. Dolly learned Swedish. That's her primary language. I mean, she speaks English fluently, but she just didn't feel equipped to write her story because I encouraged her, as I always do. I'm like, you could do this, I'll help you. But she really wanted me to do it. And I was thrilled, humbled. And yeah, it was quite a responsibility when I realized, that I'd been referred by the ETs themselves.
Yep.
How extensive it was. And when I say extensive, and her being a fully conscious contactee, really starting at age 14, she says she's had like 100 experiences per year for decades. It slows down at some point, but it's still constant. It's still ongoing. And I did well over 100 hours of interviews with her and always learn new details. So it was a really difficult story to write, but absolutely the kind of story I was looking for and always hoped to run into.
Yeah. I don't know whether to be excited or a little bit afraid that the ETs have got a Rolodex of people's names on them, that do research or cover this topic.
Yeah, well, I've kind of just discovered that this is already the case. Dolly's actually not the first person who has, told me, "Oh, the ETs know about you." I did have a guy in England call me up one day and ask me my name, "Are you Preston Dennett?" I'm like, "Yes." He says, "I really need to talk to you." The ETs gave me predictions about, future disasters. They were talking about the dangers of nuclear proliferation. Has that ever happened? And I said, "Well, yeah, that's a very common message from ETs." And after our conversation, he admitted that he had had an encounter with the Greys that morning, and they referred him to me. I said, "We want you to talk to Preston Dennett." Like,
Wow.
oh. And I know other researchers have had encounters. If you research this stuff, they research you. That happened to Ed Conroy, a mainstream journalist, when he decided to tackle the Whitley Strieber story. He ended up having encounters, and that's not uncommon. And according to Dolly, the ETs are very much aware of everything that's going on in the UFO field, of all contactees, and to some extent have contacted all people on Earth, or certainly aware of them.
Wow. So you talk about a message. What was the message that Dolly was given?
She was given many messages. I mean, she was taught extensively by ETs. And as a child, a young child, it was largely morality and ethics based. And they really said that Earth people are having a problem with this, and that this is what we need to focus on, is teaching people on Earth not to hurt each other, not to pollute their planet, not to fall into the trap of greed and corruption. So that was part of the message. Another very strong message is uplifting our psychic abilities. This is a very powerful agenda for them. This is one of their main focuses. They want people to learn telepathy, astral travel, healing, precognition, past life recall. All of this stuff is quite important to them. And they feel like this is where we're lacking. We're technologically progressing, but our spirituality is lagging behind. And another powerful message is that our planet is going through upheavals. The ETs told Dolly that there is a 12,000-year cycle, and we're at the end of it, and that our sun is wreaking havoc on our solar system in terms of coronal mass ejections, CMEs, the magnetic pole flip, and that we are on the verge of having basically a micronova, which is a huge coronal mass ejection, which will, very much like the Carrington event in the 1850s, if you've heard of that, which knocked out the telegraph system, newly emerging, is going to wreak havoc on our own power grids and basically shut it down, knock all the satellites out of the sky, and leave us without electricity or power. And this will lead to a micronova. So this is their message, that we need to prepare for this.
Right. It's an amazing story, and I haven't heard of any other contact experience that's been given the carte blanche that Dolly has with the ETs. I mean, being allowed to fly a craft, for example, is this unique in the world of contact experiences, or have you heard of other ones or other people that have been given or afforded the same luxury?
Oh, I absolutely have. And I'd say most major researchers have as well. It's not as uncommon as you might think. I know it sounds phantasmagorical, but people who don't have a strong fear reaction are not necessarily rendered paralyzed and having their memories suppressed or a screen memory, and they're given freedom of movement. They will be physically examined. That's very common. It certainly happened to Dolly. But then they'll take you to the engine room, say, here's how we fly our craft. It's almost always along the lines of electromagnetism and harnessing Earth's magnetic fields. That's what happened to Dolly. That's what happened to many people I've talked to. They'll take you to the observation deck. The wall will turn transparent, and they said, there's Earth, here's the moon. They took Dolly to Saturn. I've heard that from other people. That happened to Ray Fowler. That happened to Leonard Stringfield, I believe. And yeah, it happened to Dolly. So she had all these experiences I've heard before, and they did sit her down in the seat. This is exactly what Jay Gardner told me, a gentleman from West Virginia, who as a young child, they sat him down in the seat and handed him the controls. They said, it's very easy. Would you like to try flying it? They took him to Saturn as well. And he flew the craft around, and it was all kinds of fun. And this is exactly what Dolly described, because they asked her, what would you like to do? And her father was in the military. She comes from a military family and loved planes and flying. And so that was just something she thought of. She said, I'd love to learn how to do this. And this became a big thing. From age 14 to 19, they trained her how to fly these craft. And it's very interesting because I hear this piecemeal from many other contactees, but Dolly was able to sort of connect the dots and fill in all the blanks, and described how these craft are themselves conscious, something I've heard from many other people, and how when you fly these craft, you have to sort of psychically, empathically link up with it. And she said that's exactly how she did it. So she was able to confirm a lot of the things I'd heard, but in less detail. And that became a very big part of her experiences, was flying these craft around.
I understand Dolly being apprehensive about coming forward and talking about this because of the feedback that she'd probably get. But there's probably I wouldn't say dark side, but the possibility that unscrupulous people within within the powers that be, the government, for example, perhaps pulling Dolly aside and trying to extract information from her about what the ET craft can and can't do.
Yes, this has been actually a big problem, and something I've run into with other contactees. One lady I interviewed who had very extensive experiences had her house broken into, and they took all her hypnosis tapes. Another gentleman, I encourage him, write down your experiences. This is what I tell all people, because it helps you to, it's very therapeutic, helps you keep events straight. His house was broken into and they didn't take his TV or his stereo or anything. They took his contact notes. And Dolly, at a very young age, was being followed by what we would term, government agents or men in black type folks. In fact, it got so bad, her father hired security guards. And to this day, she is under surveillance. And when I went to Laughlin for the UFO conference there was it last year or the year before, with Dolly to meet her face to face, we were followed to the little Airbnb that we rented. I'm like, Dolly, I think someone's following us. She's like, very well could be. This happens to me. I told you about this. She provided photographs of these surveillance agents in their SUVs. And sure enough, we pulled into our Airbnb, parked, and this car parked in front of the driveway, blocking it. I'm like, look, Dolly. She's like, I'm telling you, this is what I live with. So yeah, that is a big problem. And this is something that is present with a lot of contactees, particularly if they have, very extensive experiences. And it's caused her, a lot of concern over the years.
Yep. Is she in fear of her life? Is it that bad?
Well, I'm not so sure she would say, fear, because she doesn't really have a lot of fear. She's had quite a life. I mean, she's been struck by lightning. She's been bit by a rattlesnake, grazed by a shark, stung all over her body by hornets. I mean, she's a wild child, very, very much out there and like, let's do this. So and with these UFO experiences, she doesn't have fear like the normal person. She's had a lot of out-of-body experiences. So she knows we're eternal beings. So death is not like a huge fear for her. But yeah, absolutely. She feels like they are watching her, and there's the possibility. She has had some incidents where she wonders, was she deliberately infected with, an illness, a virus? Were they trying to take her out? It's definitely something she worries about. But she just goes on with her life. She doesn't have fear, but she takes, what preparation she can. And I would say she does have concerns about it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I've always wondered if I was ever taken and was a lifelong contact experience. So my first question would be, why me? Is that something that Dolly has asked her ET friends?
Well, her contact began very, very young. Age 1. I mean, she remembers experiences reaching that far back, and really couldn't make sense of it until age 14, when they came down and she saw this craft hovering over her backyard. There were portholes. ETs were looking at her. That's when she did have some fear, and they took her on board, and she had missing time, but actually remembered it the next day. And she was trying to tell her mom about it. Her mom didn't want to hear it. And her dad heard and said, you need to meditate. You need to try and remember. And eventually approached her, and he asked her what happened. And she didn't want to say. She's like, Dad, I think I was taken on board, because she was afraid he wouldn't believe her. Till he said, listen, I need to tell you something that happened to me. He had also been contacted. So this is a generational thing, is the point I'm making.
Right.
And she never really asked, why me? It's something that's been in her family. And she feels like it's her mission, I guess. This is part of her life path. But she never, thought, why me? Why me? But she does fit the profile of other contactees, being that she's very powerfully psychic. That does seem to be a commonality. Her genetics are somewhat unusual in that she has a wide variety of ancestry. I mean, she's got Asian, she's got African, she's got Pacific Islander. She's, just what does she call it? A Heinz 57 mix, which is something I've heard from other contactees. She's got Native American. So I think there are reasons. She's very connected to the planet. She's an environmentalist. She's a scientist. She's a nurse. So people who are doing good work for humanity, trying to uplift and educate humanity, is something I do see among contactees. That could be another factor here. But it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. I think the contact experience is far more widespread than people realize. The Roper poll found 1 in 50 people
Right.
show the markers of this. So I think it is widespread. And I know there are other people out there like Dolly. She's met them on board craft, but most of these people are keeping silent for obvious reasons. They're trying to live their lives. They are under surveillance, and she's hoping that by coming forward, it will, encourage other people to step forward and move this. That was one of the reasons she wanted to tell her story. Another is because she feels this whole contact experience is being misrepresented. It's not a fearful, negative experience for her. And she says their agenda is positive. We're trying to educate people, uplift them, heal them, which is the conclusion or my assessment even before I met Dolly. So yeah, she couldn't really say why particularly her, other than that's just been the plan for through generations.
Yeah. Has she spoken to other family members that have gone through the same thing?
Yes, to some extent. Not initially, she didn't. She tried. Her mom absolutely refused and forbade her from talking about it. Her dad was in the military and often absent. So she did converse with him a few times and actually had an experience with him at one point where she was flying around and he was on the craft. But even then, it wasn't a conversation thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was agreed that this was something we just don't talk about. She wanted to talk to her little brother, Bobby, about this, but he was filled with fear. She had a good friend in school who was also a contactee, but eventually she lost contact and this friend passed away. She has talked to relatives recently.
Yeah.
Now the book has come out and it's caused, of course, a little bit of a wave there, a rippling effect among her extended family, who are each coming to terms with it in their own way. But by and large, she kept this secret from most people.
Quite a number of experiences I've spoken with talk about seeing other people on these craft. One particular experience was taken as a child, and every time he was taken, it was almost like he was being taken to a nursery on the craft, and they were being taught. Is that the kind of thing that Dolly sees?
Oh yeah, she describes that as well. This is an experience she's had many times. She does believe she's had hybrid children, which sounds, boy, coming into this field as a skeptic, that was a big pill for me to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
Half alien, half human babies. But I got cases right away. And so I started to realize, like, this is the thing. And of course, Bud Hopkins' book Intruders came out and really sort of cemented that into the, UFO literature as being part of the ET agenda. And I've interviewed many, many people who are taken on board and see these nurseries and hold the babies. And absolutely, Dolly has described that. She also describes being taken to what we would call motherships, where there's large arboretums filled with plant life, animal husbandry centers. There are medical centers. This is a big part of the ET agenda. They pick people up, physically examine them, check them out, particularly if they're, regular contactees, but really a wide variety of people. So there's these huge healing centers. And that became a big part of her job beyond just, flying these craft and swooping down to pick people up. She would assist in orienting people who, by and large, do have a strong fear reaction. She says it's not unusual for people to come on board and start shaking in fear, faint dead away, vomit,
Mm-hmm.
soil themselves, lash out violently. And she's there to sort of stop them from going off the deep end. There's been a number of times where they look at her and think she's one of the ETs, because there are human looking ETs.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, no, my name's Dolly here. You're gonna be fine. They're not here to hurt you. So that became a big part of what the ETs call gathering the children. They don't call it abductions. According to Dolly, these are voluntary experiences. They do not take people against their will. And it is a positive experience where they're coming to make sure you're all right. And if they find out you have a tumor or what have you, and they will fix it as long as it's not perhaps karmic, and that a person has chosen a condition to experience spiritual growth. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was really interesting, because I heard that from an Australian contactee. I've heard that from other contactees. I interviewed one lady who was in a car accident, and they pulled her on board and repaired her of very severe injuries and told her, we're sorry, we cannot cure all your injuries because some of these are karmic. You chose this.
Wow.
Yeah, which was amazing to me, that they have this concept of karma just like we do. But,
yeah, I mean, you touched on a couple of things there. I've always wondered, and I guess a lot of people do, is why they continually want to examine you, other than to find if you've got some sort of condition. But are there other reasons?
Well, I mean, this is a big question in the UFO field. It's like, don't they know enough about the human body already? Why do they keep taking people? And I think the answer would be, it's sort of a checkup, maintenance. People talk about implants. Dolly has evidence of implants, certainly. And she asked what they are for. And I was really amazed to hear her say what other people have told me, that these are to monitor your health, to measure the levels of pollution in your body, to boost your immune system, health related. So I think that's what we're looking at here, why people are being taken repeatedly, is just to make sure you're doing good physically. There was a case in Florida involving a gentleman who had been having visitations by grays throughout his life. He overcame his fear. He wakes up, they're surrounding his bed, and he says, if you're going to take me, why don't you fix my hernia? And they did. They said, we know of this condition that you speak of, and we will repair it. And he asked them, why are you taking me? And they said, we are interested in your genetic propensity, your genetic potential to live a long time. And I thought that was fascinating, because his grandfather was actually 106. And that just sort of shows, this is something I've heard before, they do seem to be very interested in people's longevity and their ability to live a long time.
The ETs, did Dolly give any indication where they're actually from?
Yes. Yeah, and that was interesting, because that is a huge question in this field. Of course, Betty and Barney Hill talked about Zeta Reticula. I had a case in Sedona, Florida, or Arizona, where a couple was, they said, invited on board, and they asked them flat out, where are you from? And they said, we are from a place you don't know about yet. And I hear this sort of evasive answer, like, it's not important. Betty Hill asked, and she's looking at the star map, and they said, well, do you know where you are on this map? And she said, well, no. And I said, well, then what's the point? So I hear all these sort of evasive answers, it's not important, you wouldn't understand. But she was taken to their home planet, and they told her it was in the Orion system. And that does come up in a number of cases. So yeah, they're from the Orion star cluster.
Okay.
Was where they told her. I asked her, what's the name of their planet? And she says, well, they did tell me, but they told me not to divulge that. So
right.
There was occasionally when I would be interviewing her, she'd say, I'd love to tell you, but I'm not allowed. There's some stuff they just don't want revealed.
Yeah. Did they ever take her to these locations?
Yes, yes. They started taking her to what she calls the learning center or the learning planet or the tree world, is how she kind of looked at it as a little girl. And she was thinking, are these dreams? What's going on with me? She was just a little girl. And she found herself on what appears to be another planet. It had a much lighter gravity. She could jump 20 feet into the air. The trees were tall as skyscrapers. Flowers were, the height of an adult.
Mm-hmm.
She said, it makes Earth look like a dead planet. It's so rich with life there. And they would take her up into this massive tree where they had a structure, like a treehouse type thing, and teach her with a group of other students, girls. Boys were taught in a separate location. And again, all about morality mostly, but eventually science and biology and so forth. And this was repeatedly over and over. At age 14, she had had enough and said, you're not taking me anymore unless I remember everything. I want to remember. Yep. And this is when she really connected the dots and would go to, this other planet. Most often, that's where they took her. Sometimes on board smaller craft or larger motherships. 4 times they took her to what she was shocked to find out was what we would call a Dyson sphere, basically an artificial planet.
Mm-hmm.
So that happened, and they did take her to other planets.
Yep.
And we put a whole section in the book about this, because to me that's so fascinating.
Yeah. Preston, got a few minutes left. You talk about Dolly's experiences being malevolent, but I've spoken to a number of experiences who haven't had quite the malevolency that she's experienced. Do the ETs give her any indication there are races out there that aren't particularly friendly to humans?
Yeah. Dolly's experience of benevolent. Not
malevolent. Benevolent. Just got the words mixed up.
Yeah. So, certainly I think there's a bell curve of, people's experiences. Some people do experience this as a very negative, violating thing. And this is particularly true in the beginning. And when someone experiences extreme fear, and they often do, they view this experience as malevolent. And I always ask people, what actually happened to you? And they said, well, I was physically examined. I experienced some pain. It was terrifying. I did not ask for this. I think it's malevolent. And contactees who have extensive experiences will often sort of come around and realize this is not necessarily bad for me. I would say about 5% maybe feel like this is horrible. I hate it. I don't want it to happen again. It's evil. But the vast majority, no, they do not feel that way. It is somewhat of a mixed bag because people do have trauma, PTSD,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of difficulty dealing with this. And yes, there probably are malevolent ETs out there, but that has not been her experience. She has not encountered that, except for perhaps she did have one reptilian encounter, which she felt was malevolent.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a big universe out there. And these are people like us, but they are very technologically advanced, very spiritually advanced, generally speaking. And she has not really looked into, the existence of malevolent ETs.
Yep.
But according to her, they're very cooperative, the different types of ETs. And she's met, not just grays, but tall whites and little blue beings and, winged beings, tall blue beings,
mm-hmm.
a wide variety. And
yep.
She says they all are telepathic. They cooperate together. There's no galactic federation. There's no government, no money, no federalized system. It's all just very science and ethics based. And she has not run into what you would call outright malevolent ETs.
Yeah. Preston, why did you decide to call the book Symmetry?
Actually, that was Dolly's choice. I wanted to call the book Dolly Among the Stars, which we ended up using mm-hmm. as one of the chapter titles. But I asked her, I'm like, what do you think? This is really your story. Do you have any titles you would like? She said, yes, I want to call it Symmetry. I thought, wow, that's an interesting choice. Why? She says, this was one of the main ET lessons, because they would take her to other planets and they really wanted her to understand that there's life throughout the universe and it follows a basic symmetry. There are humanoid forms everywhere. We all share very much the same template, the same genetics with variations. So they take her like to a water planet, and there were of course fish there and birds, pine trees, people like us with variations. There's a symmetry throughout the universe of life. And that was a big, big lesson. And not only with life, but the structure of the universe itself, from a subatomic level to the micro universe, with atoms rotating around a nucleus, to solar systems and galaxies. All of the universe has a basic symmetry to it and balance. And that was a huge lesson for her. And she consulted with her main contacts. Talata is one of them, and the other is a tall gray she calls Mama. And
that's a chapter in the book, Meeting Mama.
Yeah. So that was her choice. I'm like, wow, I actually really like that title.
Yeah. Preston, just about out of time. I've got about a minute left, but the book is called Symmetry, A True UFO Adventure. We hope to be speaking with Dolly at some point in the future, but you've done a great job with this book, and the explanation of what Dolly's been through is fantastic.
Yeah, I am really pleased to have been a part of this project, and I'm really, thank Dolly for having the courage to step forward. I know this has not been easy for her.
Yeah. The book available obviously on Amazon, but elsewhere, of course. And how are the sales going?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it hit #1 on Amazon, best-selling UFO book on Amazon, in, not only the US, but other countries as well. So yeah, it's bouncing around there in the top 10, top 20. And hit #1. I couldn't be more pleased. Very
fantastic.
Excited.
Terrific. Thank you, Preston.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Preston Dennett joining us today.